Welcome back to Retirement News Online from our beautiful studios here in lovely Scottsdale, Arizona. Talking about all things retirement. Right now it's income. When it comes to retirement, most people focus on how much they've saved, but far fewer understand how to turn those savings into tax efficient, reliable income that can weather market volatility. I think we're experiencing some of that right now. Here's Joe Clark. He's president and CEO of Fortegic in Cincinnati, Ohio. Welcome back, Joe. We've been talking a lot lately about all things retirement, but this is the income part where I think a lot of people find themselves into that. We've been accumulating, kind of got this number in our head that we're not really sure what it means, and we have to turn that into income at some level. And I think a lot of people, they really don't have an income plan, do they?
No, they really don't. And it reminds me of that old commercial with, what's your number? And
Right.
It's 1 gazillion. And, it's a parody on a commercial, but it's not in people's lives. And, for us, one simple saying that we use when we're working with clients or prospecting with people is the only outcome that matters is income. So, when you ask somebody, hey, what's the goal of your portfolio? They say to earn more. And then I would say, for what? And they say to have more. And I would say, for what? And I could do it all day long because unless that turns into something that's a paycheck, in the absence of people earning income, we need capital earning income.
Sure.
And so, preparing for that distribution phase to me is the most important thing that you could look at when you're doing your planning. Similar to an author knowing the ending of a book, well, 99% of people aren't thinking about that. And not only how the income looks, but what are the potential threats to that income, right? With taxes, maybe an illness or something like that. Mm-hmm. So looking at that distribution side to me is as, if not more important than the accumulation, because accumulation is pretty much out of our control. Where we position our assets is in our control, and that's going to relate more to your distribution.
Well, then let's talk about volatility right now, because a sequence of returns risk is something that may not be a common term among consumers, but for advisors, it's the idea that you could have, two people, same assets, same investments, but they start taking income, one when the market is retreating, the other when the market is starting a bull, which we've seen, happen frequently. I mean, these black swan events are becoming more and more common, but you have to plan around that, and then how do you manage all that when somebody's going to be in retirement these days for as long as 30 or 40 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think step one is mitigate as much risk as possible,
Okay.
right? What can we take off the table that is in our control? What's our best case scenario? I was talking to my son about this, and I said, the Navy SEALs have a way of beating their nervous system, and it's what do I know to be true right now? Not what can go wrong, but what do I know to be true? So from a planning perspective, if we can take that thinking, that mindset, and say, how much of this planning can we say, hey, the market's not going to impact this? And on the sequence of returns, I just had this conversation with a client last week, is you have $100,000, market drops 14% because you think it's just always going to be great. Well, then it drops 14, but you still need to take a 7% withdrawal. Your portfolio just dropped 21%. What would you need to do to even recoup some of that, right? And the dominoes start to fall. So, yeah, I think establishing a baseline of what that plan needs to look like and mitigating risk is of vital importance when we're talking about distribution.
Yeah, and again, we focus what a lot of consumers do on the accumulation side, but now we talk about taxes. Thank God everybody does good tax planning, right?
Yeah, that's right.
In fact, pretty much nobody does, but that's another thing. The less you have to give the government legally, the more cash flow potentially you have in retirement. And I think, would you agree that people getting into retirement are under the assumption that they're going to be in a lower tax bracket, and that's probably not always the case. Probably that's frequently not the case.
Yeah, it is. And it's not just a measure of where their effective or marginal brackets are, but also what do their deductions look like, right? And there's a whole variety of things where there could be a potential offset of Social Security income. There are so many elements that need to be looked at where, in years when maybe you're in a favorable tax bracket while you're still earning, maybe that's a time to talk about a Roth conversion, right? So balancing that on an annual basis is vital, because there's a lot of things that maybe could be done leading up to that point where you don't have to make decisions uninformed or hastily, later on in retirement. So I think even in your later years of accumulation before distribution, those are very important things to look at in terms of taxation.
And at the time of this interview right now, we're at war, we've had interest rates are kind of going back up. The market has been up and down. I mean, we've seen large swings. What do you tell people right now when they look at that and they're, because you're more than a financial person, you're a therapist at times. You have to keep people from knee jerking. But how do you help people understand that a plan, if you have a plan, it actually accounts for most of this?
Yeah, I mean, that's a $1 million question. But for me, and my style is more, I want to get into their emotions a little bit and understand. If we see the market drop 17%, tell me how that makes you feel. Hey, what do you think your decision is going to be at that point? It's the difficult thing is to prepare for a rainy day when it's perfect weather outside, like it is here in Arizona. You just don't think about it. Then it starts pouring buckets of rain, and it's a little bit too late to grab the umbrella. So what our job is to almost, I give it like a visual of like what can hit us. How can we be prepared for that? But how are you going to react to that?
Right.
Usually it's not logically, usually it's emotionally. So
Sure.
I think walking down that path with them through conversation and meetings is huge, because it forces them to process that and discern what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think finally, in closing, I think you mentioned something emotional, risk tolerance. That's an emotional thing that you set when you're younger, and you probably never look at it again until you get to the point where we're talking about retirement right now. But that's not really risk capacity, which is a completely different thing, which is the capacity to to perform in times like this.
Yeah, I mean, how are you going to respond in times of stress, in times of worry? You really don't know until you get into that moment, right? But your plan doesn't have emotions. It doesn't have a heart. It doesn't have a brain. Your plan has a path, and you're in control of that plan. So what I would say is, if we put that plan in motion when we're not in an emotional state, we're already at an advantage over most people that wait to put that plan in place when it's probably a little bit too emotional.
You fix the roof before it rains is what I think we always say.
Yes.
Joe Clark with Fortegic in Cincinnati. Joe, thank you so much. This is Retirement News Online, and you can find out more at retirementnewsonline.com. Of course, thank you for watching.